is an unnecessary amount of ill treatment in the animal production system that we have, in addition to some health risks that are involved because of it. And this is according to the Pew Commission on Industrial Farm Animal Productions report, which was given in 2008. I'm going to be talking about the farming, some of the farming situations there are, how the animals are treated, why they're treated the way they are, and what we can do about the situation. As for the farming situation, the farmers that are in doing this part of the system are under a growing contract, which means that they don't have any say in how the animals are raised, their conditions, or nor do they really own them. And another interesting thing about this contract is that many farmers with it tend to be in deep debt or have a lot of debt, which means that they're kind of locked into the contract. We can't really escape. As for how the animals are treated, according to PETA and a report from Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future, they're crowded into spaces, enclosed spaces, by a very large number. And some of these confinement systems are either feedlots, cages, sheds, or crates. And because of this high population in such a confined area, they don't have much room to move, or at all, or even how they would naturally. In addition to having a problem with disease and infection. And because it's such a cramped area, it's easy to spread. And this isn't just with mammals, but this is also an issue with fish farms too, where because they're animals, they also have excrement, which they end up swimming in and getting also disease and infections from it. And this type of confined farming didn't really happen until the last half century. Whereas before that, they had more diversity in their stock, as in they had more than one type of cow on the feedlot, and they had a bigger feedlot. So as for their feeding, they're fed not for the health of the animal, but for what the products they can get from it. They'll be fed something that'll either give them more meat, higher milk production, or whatever kind of trade they want. And the side effect from this is that it can cause bloating, which is really just uncomfortable and at times painful for the animal. And as for the slaughter or butchering of the animal, it's done in a fairly harsh manner. And whereas like even piglets who are sick or on the short side are literally killed with blunt force. And as I understand that you need some sort of emotional distance when you're killing an animal on a regular basis. But that doesn't mean you can't do it with compassion or gentleness. Now, as I mentioned before, there's disease and infections are fairly common in this system. And so to combat that, they use medicines or antibiotics. And the issue with that is they do it on a regular basis to prevent it. And so, which means that the bacteria can develop an immunity to the medicine. which, to take an example from the report, if a person passes a sickness to a pig and the pig passes it back, they'd be passing a medically immune or drug immune bacteria or sickness back to the person, which means it's going to be that much more difficult for that person to heal or better. Now, as for why this happens, it's simply because there's not very many restrictions there on the management of animals. There is some in regulations in medication and medical treatment of what you can do or can't use and when to do it. But the only effect we've had so far in preventing this is some companies have agreed, thanks to some animal welfare groups, to ease out of their use of gestation cages and battery cages. As for what you can do, look into this a little bit yourself and then talk about it with those that are around you. Or even watch a documentary. Me and my family watched one called Food Inc. And then there's always the opportunity to, if you wish, to join with an animal rights or a welfare group. So in summary, just some farming systems or farmers don't really have a choice in how they farm because of their contracts. And the situation of the animals, they honestly live in squalor, and they're killed without compassion or sympathy. And as for why it happens, there's no law saying you can't do it this way or you have to do it this way. So I just like to end with, just be aware of where your food comes from, where your animal products come from, and the impact it has.